You are listening to Crazy HOA Moments. The portal log showed who really touched the file. I do not need your explanation. That was Kimberly Nash, board president of the Willow Bend Neighborhood Association, standing by the mailbox cluster with her phone on a gimbal pointed at my face from 6 inches away. She had just told me I was suspended from mailbox access because she had witnesses who saw me taking packages. I work as an IT compliance auditor in Kansas City, Missouri, and I had never stolen anything in my life. But according to her, I was a thief, and she was shutting me down. She wore a tan puffer vest over a workout shirt, a blue visor that sat crooked on her blonde bob, and she held a battery-powered label maker in one hand like it was a badge. Her other hand gripped her phone on that gimbal rig, the screen glowing as it recorded everything. I was in my blue hoodie with the hood up, holding a small notepad that had gotten soaked in the rain earlier that morning. The pages were wrinkled and damp, and I could barely read my own handwriting, but I had written down every detail of the accusation the moment she started yelling. Behind her, 2 other residents had stopped on the walkway to watch. One of them was holding a grocery bag, frozen mid-step. The other had her arms crossed, eyes wide. Kimberly did not care. She raised her voice so they could hear. "This is not personal. I am the reason this place stays safe. You are on the security list, and we have a process. I have a process, and you will follow it." I kept my voice steady. "What security list? Who put me on it?" She waved the label maker like a conductor's baton. "The HOA decides that. You do not get to question the process. I am only a messenger." That was a lie. I had seen the complaint form earlier that morning when the management office emailed it to me as a courtesy. The form was formatted like a template, but the signature at the bottom was hers. She had written the accusation herself, then tried to act like it came from someone else. I did not call her out yet because I wanted to see how far she would go. I asked if I could see the camera footage. I was polite. I said I just wanted to understand what happened so I could clear it up. She snapped. "Only the HOA decides what is shared. You do not get access to anything until we complete the investigation. And if you keep pushing, I will make sure you are cited for harassment." She turned and walked toward the clubhouse, still filming. I followed at a distance because I needed to know what she was going to do next. The mailbox cluster sat at the corner of the main entrance road, and the clubhouse was 100 yards down the curved sidewalk. The Willow Bend Neighborhood Association covered about 200 homes in a planned community with wide streets, brick mailbox clusters, and a central clubhouse that housed the management office and a small gym. The HOA was aggressive about enforcement, speed bumps every 50 feet. Towing signs on every corner, a roving patrol that left violation notices for trash cans left out past noon on collection day. I had moved here 8 months ago because the rent was reasonable and I was rebuilding my finances after a bad year. Medical bills and a car accident had wiped out my savings, and I could not afford to absorb bogus fees or towing charges. That was the stakes. Every dollar mattered, and Kimberly was about to cost me hundreds if I did not stop her. She reached the clubhouse entrance and held the door open with her hip while she adjusted the gimbal. The phone was still pointed at me. I stopped 10 feet away and pulled out my own phone to take a photo of the scene. She saw the movement, and her face went red. "You are not allowed to film me. This is HOA property and I am conducting official business." I lowered my phone. "I am standing on a public sidewalk. You have been filming me for 5 minutes. She ignored that and stepped inside. I waited a beat, then followed her into the lobby. The management office was on the left behind a glass door with the HOA name printed in vinyl letters. Inside, a woman in her 50s sat at a desk with a computer and a stack of files. Her name was Sharon, and she was the mailroom worker who sorted packages and handled key requests. She was also my ally, though Kimberly did not know that yet. Sharon had noticed something 2 weeks earlier. She told me in the parking lot one morning that complaint forms had been showing up in batches, all formatted the same way, all signed by different people but printed on the same printer. She said it felt like someone was mass-producing fake outrage and she was keeping copies just in case. I had thanked her and told her I would let her know if I needed help. Now I needed help. Kimberly marched up to the desk and slapped the label maker down. "I need you to print a notice suspending this resident from mailbox access. Right now." While he is standing there. Sharon looked at me, then back at Kimberly. I need authorization from the manager before I can do that. I am the board president. I am giving you authorization. Sharon did not move. The policy says I need the manager's signature or an email from the management company. Kimberly leaned over the desk. Print it now or I will make sure you are written up for insubordination. Sharon hesitated, then clicked her mouse a few times and sent a document to the printer. The machine hummed and spit out a single sheet. Kimberly snatched it before Sharon could hand it over and turned to face me. She held the paper up so I could see it, though the text was too small to read from where I stood. This is your notice. You are suspended from all mailbox and package locker access pending the investigation. If you attempt to retrieve mail or packages, you will be cited for trespassing and your vehicle will be towed. I stepped forward and held out my hand. Can I have a copy? She pulled the paper back. No, this is the only copy and it stays with the HOA. You have been notified. That was the moving goalpost. She had just told Sharon to print it so I could see it, and now she was refusing to give me a copy. I kept my voice calm. If I am being accused of theft, I have a right to see the evidence and respond in writing. You will get your chance at the hearing. Until then, stay away from the mailboxes. She turned and walked out of the office, still holding the paper. I looked at Sharon. She mouthed the words "I am sorry" and tilted her head toward the file cabinet behind her desk. I understood. She was telling me she had copies of something, and I could come back later when Kimberly was gone. I left the office and walked back toward my unit. My car was parked in the visitor lot because my assigned spot was being resurfaced, and I had been using the visitor spaces for 3 days. That was going to be important later, but I did not know it yet. Kimberly was standing by the mailbox cluster again, and this time she was on the phone. She was reading my license plate number out loud. I stopped walking and listened. She was talking to a tow company. Yes, I am the board president. The vehicle is in violation of the guest parking policy. I need it hooked and removed as soon as possible. License plate is... She read off the full number, then gave the address of the complex. No, I do not need to post a warning. This is an emergency removal under the HOA Enforcement Authority. I pulled out my phone and started recording. She saw me and turned her back, but she did not lower her voice. She wanted me to hear. She wanted me to panic. I called the management company and asked to speak to the manager. I got voicemail. I left a message explaining that I was being accused of theft with no evidence, that I had been suspended from mailbox access without a hearing, and that the board president was calling a tow truck on my legally parked car. I asked for an immediate callback. Then I called the tow company. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I explained that I was a resident, that my car was legally parked in a visitor space with permission from management, and that the person who called them did not have the authority to order an emergency tow. The dispatcher said she would check the policy and call me back. Kimberly finished her call and walked over to me. She stopped 3 feet away and held up her phone again, still filming. You are harassing me. I am documenting this for the police. I kept my voice flat. You just called a tow truck on my car while I was standing here. That is not harassment. That is retaliation. You violated the guest parking policy. Guest spaces are for guests only. You are a resident. I have been parking here for 3 days with permission from Sharon because my spot is being resurfaced. You know that. She smiled. I do not know that. You need to prove it. Another moving goalpost. She knew I had permission because Sharon had sent an email to the board 3 days ago explaining the situation, but Kimberly was pretending she never saw it. My phone buzzed. It was the tow company calling back. I answered and put it on speaker so Kimberly could hear. The dispatcher said they had reviewed the policy and confirmed that emergency removals required either a posted warning or a signed authorization from the management company. Since neither existed, they were canceling the tow. I thanked her and hung up. Kimberly did not say anything. She just turned and walked toward the clubhouse again, this time moving faster. I followed her because I had a feeling she was about to escalate again, and I was right. She went back into the management office and walked straight to Sharon's desk. I stayed in the lobby and watched through the glass door. Kimberly was pointing at the computer screen and talking fast. Sharon was shaking her head. Then Kimberly picked up a file folder from the desk and tried to walk out with it. Sharon stood up and said something I could not hear. Kimberly shoved the folder back onto the desk and stormed out. She walked past me without looking and headed for the parking lot. I waited until she was out of sight, then went into the office. Sharon was standing next to her desk, arms crossed. She tried to take your file. I told her she needed a subpoena or a signed release from you. What is in the file? Sharon sat down and opened a drawer. Copies of the complaint forms and the access log for the package lockers. She pulled out a plastic sleeve with about 10 pages inside. I made copies last week because I knew something was off. Look at these. She laid 2 complaint forms side by side on the desk. They were identical. Same formatting, same wording, same template structure. The only differences were the dates and the signatures at the bottom. One was signed by Kimberly. The other was signed by someone named Laura Chen, a name I had never heard before. Sharon tapped the signatures. Laura Chen does not live here anymore. She moved out 6 months ago. But someone has been using her name on forms ever since. That was the twist. Kimberly was not just framing me. She was forging complaints from people who did not exist or no longer lived in the community. She was creating a paper trail to justify whatever enforcement action she wanted, and no one had caught her until now. I took photos of both forms with my phone. Then I asked Sharon if she had the access log. She pulled up a spreadsheet on her computer and turned the monitor so I could see it. The log showed every time someone used a key to open the package locker room. Each entry had a timestamp, a key number, and a duration. I scanned the list and found something immediately. On the night I was accused of stealing packages, the log showed that key number 7 had been used at 11:15 p.m. and the door had been open for 9 minutes. My key was number 14 and I had not used it that night. I had been at home watching a movie, and I had the streaming receipt to prove it. Who has key number 7? Sharon clicked a few times and pulled up a key assignment list. Key 7 is assigned to the board president. Kimberly. Sharon nodded. And look at this. She scrolled down the log. Key 7 has been used after hours at least a dozen times in the last 2 months. Always late at night. Always when no one else is around. I took a screenshot of the log and the key assignment list. Then I asked Sharon if she was willing to make a statement if this went to a hearing. She said yes, but she was leaving town that night to visit family and would not be back for a week. That was the time pressure. I had to move fast, or I would lose my best witness. I thanked her and left the office. My plan was to go back to my unit, write everything down, and send a formal complaint to the management company with all the evidence. But Kimberly had other ideas. She was waiting for me in the parking lot. This time she was not alone. She had cornered a guy named Mike who lived 2 buildings over. Mike was young, maybe mid-20s, and he looked uncomfortable. Kimberly was standing close to him, talking fast and pointing at me as I walked toward my car. I did not hear everything she said, but I heard enough. She was telling Mike that I had been stealing packages and that she needed him to sign a statement confirming he had seen suspicious activity. Mike was shaking his head. He said he had not seen anything. Kimberly raised her voice. You do not have to see it to confirm it. You just have to say you are aware of concerns in the community. That is all. I will write the statement for you. Mike looked over at me, then back at Kimberly. I am not signing anything. I do not know what you are talking about. Kimberly stepped closer. If you do not cooperate, I will make sure the board reviews your parking violations. You have been over the line in your spot for weeks. Mike pulled his hands out of his pockets and walked away without saying anything else. Kimberly watched him go, then turned to me. Her face was red again, and she was breathing hard. You are poisoning people against me. You are turning this community into a hostile environment. I did not say anything. I just unlocked my car and got in. She walked up to the driver's side window and tapped on the glass with her knuckles. I rolled the window down halfway. You are not going to win this. I have documentation. I have witnesses. I have a process, and you will follow it. She pulled out her phone and held it up to the window, taking photos of me through the glass. The gimbal was still attached, and the phone was less than 6 inches from my face. I could see the red recording light blinking. I rolled the window back up and started the engine. She kept filming as I backed out and drove away. I went home, parked in the visitor lot again because my spot was still blocked, and went inside to write everything down. That night, I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Kimberly's face on that gimbal screen, 6 inches away, the red light blinking. I kept thinking about the complaint forms, and the access log, and the forged signatures. I kept thinking about Mike and the way she had tried to intimidate him into signing a false statement. I kept thinking about Sharon leaving town, and the tow truck and the moving goalposts. At 2 in the morning, I got up and made coffee. I opened my laptop and started drafting a formal complaint to the management company. I attached the photos of the complaint forms, the screenshot of the access log, and a timeline of every interaction I had with Kimberly. I explained that she had accused me of theft with no evidence, suspended my mailbox access without a hearing, called a tow truck on my legally parked car, attempted to intimidate a witness, and forged complaint forms using the names of former residents. I said I was requesting an immediate investigation and a full retraction of the accusation in writing. I sent the email at 3 a.m. Then I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for a reply I knew would not come until morning. At 6 a.m. my phone rang. It was the management company. The manager said she had received my email and reviewed the attached evidence. She said the complaint forms were concerning and she was going to pull the full file to compare signatures. She said the access log was even more concerning because it showed a pattern of after-hours entry that had not been reported or explained. She said she was scheduling an emergency meeting with the board for the following evening, and I was invited to attend and present my evidence. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called Sharon and left a voicemail asking if she could send me a written statement before she left town. She called back 20 minutes later and said she had already drafted one and would email it to me within the hour. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I printed copies of everything. I organized the evidence into a binder with tabs. I wrote a script so I would not forget any details. I practiced reading it out loud to make sure it sounded clear and not emotional. At 4 p.m., I got a text from Kimberly. It was a photo of a hearing notice with my name on it. The text said I was being cited for harassment, trespassing, and interference with HOA operations. The hearing was scheduled for the same night as the board meeting, at the same time in the same room. She was trying to box me in. If I showed up, she would turn it into a hearing where I was the defendant. If I did not show up, she would claim I had forfeited my right to respond. I called the manager back and told her about the hearing notice. She said Kimberly did not have the authority to schedule a hearing without board approval, and the notice was invalid. She said the meeting that night was a board meeting, not a hearing, and I was there as a witness, not a defendant. She said she would send Kimberly an email clarifying that, and if Kimberly tried to turn it into a hearing, the manager would shut it down. I felt a little better after that call, but I was still nervous. I had never been to a board meeting before, and I did not know what to expect. I did not know if Kimberly would bring her own witnesses or her own evidence. I did not know if the other board members would believe me or believe her. At 6 p.m., I drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was full, and there were people standing outside the main entrance talking in small groups. I recognized a few faces from the mailbox cluster and the management office. No one looked happy. I walked inside and found the meeting room. It was a small conference room with a long table and about 15 chairs. Kimberly was already there, sitting at the head of the table with a stack of files in front of her. She had changed into a blazer over her workout clothes, and she had added a laminated name tag that said Board Precedent in all caps. The label maker sat next to her files, plugged into the wall. The manager was sitting to her right, along with 2 other board members I had never met. There were about 10 residents in the chairs along the walls. I took a seat near the door and set my binder on my lap. The manager called the meeting to order and explained that we were there to discuss a complaint filed by a resident regarding alleged theft and HOA enforcement procedures. She said the resident had provided evidence that raised questions about the validity of the complaint and the conduct of the board president. She said the board would review the evidence and determine next steps. Kimberly interrupted. "This is not a trial. This is an internal matter, and I have already investigated it." The resident in question was seen taking packages from the mailbox cluster on multiple occasions. I have witness statements and security footage. The manager asked to see the witness statements. Kimberly pulled a file from her stack and handed over 3 pages. The manager read them, then passed them to the other board members. She looked at Kimberly. "These statements are all formatted the same way. They are all signed by people who no longer live in the community. And they are all dated after the alleged incidents." Kimberly leaned back in her chair. That is because I had to track down the witnesses and get them to sign affidavits after the fact. It is a standard procedure. The manager shook her head. No, it is not. And it does not explain why the signatures match the names of former residents who moved out months ago. Kimberly did not have an answer for that. She just stared at the manager and said nothing. The manager turned to me. Do you have your evidence? I opened my binder and pulled out the copies of the complaint forms. I stood up and walked to the table. I laid the two forms side by side in front of the board members. These are two complaints filed against me. They are identical in formatting and wording. The only difference is the date and the signature. One is signed by Kimberly Nash. The other is signed by Laura Chen, who moved out 6 months ago. I have confirmed with the management office that Laura Chen has not filed any complaints and did not authorize anyone to use her name. I pulled out the access log screenshot and set it on the table. This is the package locker access log. It shows that on the night I was accused of stealing packages, key number 7 was used at 11:15 p.m. Key number 7 is assigned to the board president. My key is number 14, and I did not use it that night. I was at home, and I have a streaming receipt to prove it. I pulled out the receipt and the return slip from my streaming account. Both had timestamps showing I had been watching a movie at home during the time I was supposedly stealing packages. The receipt and return slip were blurred in the printout, but the timestamps were clear. One of the board members looked at Kimberly. Why were you in the package locker room at 11:15 p.m.? Kimberly hesitated. I was checking for abandoned packages. It is part of my duties. The board member pointed at the log. You checked for abandoned packages a dozen times in the last 2 months. Always late at night. Always when no one else was around. That does not sound like a routine check. Kimberly stood up. I do not have to explain my schedule to anyone. I am the board president, and I have the authority to access any common area at any time. The manager raised her hand. Actually, you do have to explain it, because the access log shows a pattern that matches the timeline of missing packages and theft reports, and the complaint forms you filed are forged. Kimberly slammed her hand on the table. You are accusing me of theft. That is defamation. I will sue every one of you. The manager stayed calm. I am not accusing you of anything. I am asking you to explain the evidence. If you cannot explain it, the board will vote to suspend your enforcement authority and refer this matter to the police. Kimberly grabbed her files and her label maker and walked toward the door. Before she left, she turned and pointed at me. You are going to regret this. I have a process, and you will follow it. She left. The room was silent for a moment. Then the manager turned to the other board members. I recommend we vote to freeze all enforcement actions initiated by the board president until we complete a full audit. I also recommend we issue a formal retraction of the theft accusation against this resident and restore his mailbox access immediately. The board members voted. It was unanimous. The manager turned to me. I am sorry this happened. We will send you a written retraction within 24 hours, and we will include a statement that the HOA takes full responsibility for the false accusation. If you suffered any financial damages, please submit a claim and we will review it. I thanked her and left the meeting. On my way out, I saw Mike standing in the hallway. He looked relieved. I heard what happened in there. I am glad you stood up to her. She tried to bully me into signing something, and I was not going to do it. I nodded. Thanks for not signing. He smiled. No problem. And for what it is worth, I saw her carrying boxes out of the package locker room a few weeks ago. I did not think anything of it at the time, but now I am wondering if she was stealing packages. That was a new detail. I asked him if he would be willing to make a statement, and he said yes. I got his contact information and told him the manager might reach out. I went home and slept for 10 hours straight. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the management company. It was the written retraction. It said the HOA had completed a preliminary review of the theft accusation and determined that it was based on falsified complaint forms and incorrect evidence. It said the accusation was withdrawn in full, my mailbox access was restored, and the HOA apologized for any inconvenience or distress caused by the false claim. The email also included a second attachment. It was a notice to all residents explaining that the board president had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into alleged misconduct, including theft, forgery, and abuse of authority. The notice said all enforcement actions initiated by the board president in the last 6 months were under review, and any resident who believed they had been unfairly cited or fined should contact the management office immediately. I forwarded the email to Sharon and thanked her for her help. She replied an hour later and said she was glad it worked out, and she had already been contacted by the police for a formal statement. 2 days later, I got a call from a detective with the Kansas City Police Department. He said they were investigating reports of theft and fraud at Willow Bend, and he wanted to interview me as a witness. I agreed and met him at the clubhouse the next afternoon. The detective was polite and professional. He took my statement, reviewed the evidence I had collected, and asked if I had any additional information. I told him about Mike and the boxes. He wrote it down and said he would follow up. A week later, the HOA sent out another notice. It said the board had voted to remove Kimberly Nash from her position as board president and ban her from holding any HOA leadership role for 5 years. It said the investigation had revealed that she had stolen packages, clubhouse supplies, and petty cash over a period of several months, and that she had used forged complaint forms to justify enforcement actions against residents who questioned her. It said the HOA was cooperating fully with law enforcement and would pursue all legal remedies available. The notice also said the HOA was freezing all enforcement actions until a neutral third-party management company could complete a full review of policies and procedures. That was the HOA consequence, and it was exactly what I had hoped for. 3 weeks after that, I got a letter in the mail from the HOA attorney. It was a settlement offer. The HOA was offering to reimburse me for any out-of-pocket expenses related to the false accusation, including time off work, legal consultation fees, and emotional distress. The offer was for $2,000, and it included a release of liability. I accepted the offer. I did not need to drag it out any further. I had cleared my name, Kimberly had been removed, and the HOA had been forced to overhaul its enforcement process. That was enough. The best part came a month later. I was at the mailbox cluster picking up a package when I saw a tow truck pull into the parking lot. The driver got out and walked over to a car parked in a guest space. The car had a familiar tan puffer vest on the dashboard. I walked over and asked the driver what was going on. He said the vehicle owner had called him to tow a car that was blocking her assigned spot, but when he arrived, he realized the car blocking the spot was actually hers. She had parked in the wrong space and then called a tow on herself. The driver said he could not tow the car without proper authorization from the HOA, and he needed the owner to move it herself. The owner was Kimberly, and she was standing next to the tow truck arguing with him. I walked closer and heard her say she did not need authorization because she was the board president. The driver shook his head and said his company had updated their policy after a complaint from the HOA, and they now required written authorization for all tows, no exceptions. That was the payoff vector. A vendor refusing to cooperate without proper authorization. It was the exact same policy Kimberly had tried to weaponize against me, and now it was being used against her. Kimberly saw me watching and walked over. Her face was red and her hands were shaking. "You did this. You ruined everything." I kept my voice calm. "I did not do anything. You called a tow on yourself." She opened her mouth to say something else, but the tow driver interrupted. "Ma'am, I need you to move your car. I am leaving." He got back in his truck and drove away. Kimberly stood there for a moment, then got in her car and drove off. I never saw her at the mailbox cluster again. A few weeks later, Sharon told me that Kimberly had been caught on camera taking packages from the locker room and stashing them in her car. The footage had been turned over to the police, and charges were pending. Sharon also said that when the police searched Kimberly's unit, they found a storage closet full of stolen items, including the toolkit that had been taken from a car in the guest lot. The toolkit had my neighbor's name engraved on the handle, and it was one of several items that had been reported missing over the past 6 months. The rumor died in real time as people watched the proof. The HOA sent out a final notice explaining what had happened and apologizing to all residents who had been falsely accused or unfairly cited. The notice said the board was implementing new checks and balances to prevent abuse of authority, including mandatory training for board members, regular audits of enforcement actions, and a resident complaint hotline. I got a call from the detective a month later. He said Kimberly had been charged with theft, fraud, and abuse of office. She had pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was overwhelming. He said the case was moving forward, and I might be called as a witness if it went to trial. I said I would cooperate. The funniest part came last. Sharon told me that when the police reviewed Kimberly's documentation, they found that her notes were blank. She had boasted about keeping detailed records of every enforcement action, but when the detective asked to see them, she handed over a binder full of blank pages. She had been faking the documentation the entire time. That was the funny karma beat. Karen boasts about documentation and her notes are blank. The HOA also issued a written order that Kimberly was not allowed to contact me directly. That was the Karen consequence, and it gave me peace of mind knowing she could not show up at my car or my mailbox anymore. The final twist came when I checked my mailbox one morning and found a handwritten note from the new board president. The note said the HOA had completed its audit and discovered that Kimberly had been using the same complaint template to file fake reports against more than a dozen residents over the past year. The same complaint template appeared in multiple files, proving someone was mass-producing fake outrage. The note said the board was reaching out to every affected resident and offering to expunge the false citations from their records. I still live at Willow Bend. The new board is better. The enforcement is more reasonable. I have not had any trouble with my mailbox or my parking spot. And every time I walk past the clubhouse, I think about that meeting and the moment Kimberly walked out with her label maker and her gimbal phone. Defeated and exposed. Catch you in the next one, and I will be back soon with another story.